Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hybrid Trends. And I want to talk about the network switches for HCI today. But as I'm not an expert, as you know, I'm just doing those interviews. I brought Basel with me. And Basel, maybe you can introduce yourself to our community and yeah, tell us what you do, where you are, where you're located, and how amazing you do your job.
Well, first of all, an expert, I'm flattered, so thank you. But yeah, hi everyone. My name is Basel. I'm based out of Seattle, so I'm going to the Redmond office. I am on the Azure Edge and Network Platform team. I know it's a long name, but in essence, I'm a PM who works on both HCI and server features. Specifically related to switches. I help manage the switch validation program, which we'll obviously talk about in a bit. And so, looking forward to answering any questions that you have on that, and kind of shedding some more light into how we go about determining what switches work best with HCI and how that ecosystem looks.
Yeah. So you already said the term. So what's the switch validation program? What's that all about?
Yeah, so I'll give some background, right? Historically, so this was maybe a couple of years ago, around 20H2 and 21H2. There was a decision that the support team was getting a lot of, obviously requests from folks using a variety of switches. And it got difficult for that team to properly, diagnose and troubleshoot issues. Because, your vendors have just differences in their OS, the actual hardware itself. And so there was a decision made to say, okay, let's look at HCI and at its most at the most basic level feature set, what requirements can we say need to be consistent across the board? And but at the time when this came out, it was very much we would work with partners and say, hey, do you meet these requirements? And it was a very much verbal yes or no. There wasn't much structure behind it. And that worked at least in the beginning, right, for 20 H2 and 21 H2. But as time went on, and obviously new switches were released, and folks would reach out about maybe existing ones that didn't necessarily work, even though they were told they would. We took a step back and said, is there a way we can add some structure to this that at least can check switches? And so this was right around when I started at Microsoft about 2 years ago. So when I joined, we had just started development on a tool that's actually a public available tool in GitHub that uses LLDP frames to verify that these base set of requirements were met, right? And the idea was that we would move beyond saying to the vendor, hey, do you meet these, yes or no, to here's this tool that you can run on your devices, run them, it'll spit out the results in the form of a PDF, along with the capture of the LLDP. You can submit that through the GitHub. We'll take a look, approve, and then ultimately list. So we moved from uh, a verbal yes or no to here's a structure behind it. And again, to go back to it, the idea was we wanted to try and limit the amount of time that the support team was taking, because that was not only affecting the support team, but also the customers looking for help as well, right? I mean, with so many variables, it was difficult. And so by introducing this tool, we are now able to validate switches per the vendor's desire, right? Um, and have those listed and say, okay, at a base level, the support team knows that these switches support the following requirements, and so at least we can eliminate or at least start looking at those as potential areas where there might be issues.
Okay, so I think you will also provide us with the GitHub link so that we can put it into the description. For I think it's also good for customers to check their
Yes.
switches and have an additional say opportunity to see if the sales team from that specific vendor told them the truth or support or whatsoever. That's amazing. I didn't know about it too, to be honest. I would have used it before, so even a good learning for me here. Um, just going a bit deeper on we already have a lot of partners on that validation list and also in the documents listed like Arista, Cisco with certain versions. NVIDIA, so formerly Mellanox, and also smaller partners like Netgear. If I've would have, I'm now new in the biz. I've developed my own switches, or I'm longer there and I'm maybe someone who focused on Wi-Fi in the past or security in the past. Yes, Ubiquiti, I'm looking at you guys. And I want to be on that program. I want to be an edge switch. I want to provide my solution with HCI or with Windows Server, so it also works perfectly for Windows Server and hyperconverged. What do I need to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll look at it from two different angles. I'll look at it from the perspective of you're a user, you're a customer, and you're looking to get a switch validated. And I'll look at it from the perspective of you're a vendor. We'll go on the vendor route. It's pretty straightforward. So as a vendor, if you are looking at your suite of switches and saying, "Hey, I'd love to have mine listed," right? There's two ways really to go about it. You can skip right ahead and go right to the GitHub, download the tool, run it, submit your results. We have an internal team, the switch validation team. We have an alias, and so I can provide that alias as well as part of the description for any questions that folks might have. But that alias gets notified, hey, you now have a new submission. We go in, review. We reach back out, obviously, if you have any questions or any clarification. But if everything looks good from the results, and it checks out, then it really is as simple as download the tool, run the tool, submit the results, get approved, and you're on the list in a week, right, or less. So it's pretty straightforward there. From the customer perspective, now we wanted to limit this so that only official vendors can submit results. That being said, you can certainly go and download the tool and run it on switches that you have at home, for example, or that you're using that aren't listed yet, and get those results for yourself. Now, in order to then get that switch listed, that's where talking to the vendor comes into play, right? So if there's a contact at, you saying Ubiquiti as an example, right? Let's say you want to get Ubiquiti switch listed. You can run the tool, show Ubiquiti, say, hey, I ran it, it's passing, or at least it passes for just management or just storage, right? You can have a combination. You don't need to have all the traffic types covered. You can mix and match depending on the capabilities of the switch. But you can go to Ubiquiti and say, hey, I've ran this test, it passes. Can you work with Microsoft to get the switch listed? At that point, the customer's done the work as far as validation. We would just need someone from Ubiquiti just to, run that again, confirm, and submit. And just like that, they can be listed.
And that's a good point, especially for the smaller vendors who are more in an edge scenario. If you're being a big retailer who uses, let's say, a cheaper kind of switch in his doors and uses HCI or Windows Server in switchless mode with 2 nodes, it's perfectly fine to just validate for compute and management and leave the rest and say, hey, we are out when it comes to storage on RDMA, data center bridging, all that fancy, but firstly expensive and complex stuff. But it's still you there. You can give some insurance to your customers and maybe open another business. So I'm personally using the Ubiquiti stuff. I'm using the Enterprise XGs in my own lab, and I'm using the configuration we discussed with switchless on my Dell servers, and then just using computer management. I'm totally fine with that. I don't need to have more, and it comes on a really good price point at this that. So coming to our next point. So how does it? You already said we had a lot of issues with support and unmanaged switches. How that comes down to support if I use switches which are not validated. Do I have any downside with support? Is there anything that the support is declined completely for HCI? Where are the limits for that?
Yeah, so I think so earlier on in this process, before we had the structure behind it, there would be some consideration as far as support goes. But as we're now 23H2 moving to 24H2, and we've had this out for a couple of releases now, the support team is more inclined to say, hey, if this switch is on the list, then we're not gonna, take a look. Obviously, if it's maybe sort of general HCI related questions, sure. But if you're saying specifically, hey, it's a Ubiquiti. I want to keep picking on them, but that's the example, right? Specifically, this device that we know is not listed is causing me this problem running this, or this aspect of HCI. Unfortunately, the support team will say, it's not technically a supported switch. It might work for you, but from the support perspective, unless it's something that we've said is validated, for the risk of using their time and their resources, and it's difficult for them to take a look there. So the point of all this is highly suggest that for anything that is not listed right now and it does work, for example, for customers or even at-home users, right? To get it listed, because it really isn't that much. It isn't that much work to get it right. It's the tool maybe takes a minute to run. But yes, to clarify, yeah, from the support perspective, they're not going to be much help, unfortunately, when it comes to non-listed switches.
Okay. But maybe also taking that as a reach out to the smallest vendors. As you already said, there is no effort in running that script. And if it passes, you have an opportunity. You can submit. Yes, if there's the development efforts behind, no one will force you afterwards to develop those features required. But you can at least check if you already have a product which works and just opens a new channel, a new opportunity, even if it's only marketing for you.
Exactly.
For free, basically, or for an hour of work or 2 hours of work. And that's important, or that's something which is always in my heart from a data center or from a vendor perspective. If I see an opportunity which with low-hanging fruits and I can make some business or can make something for the community out of it, why not?
I think to go off of that as well.
Sorry, yeah, go on.
I was going to mention, a lot of the sort of bigger name vendors, right? They kind of focus on these enterprise switches, right? And the idea is, well, why would we not have the, priciest switch listed, right? It's the most amount of revenue. But, you have to look at it from the perspective of, well, why not cover the entire gamut of switches, right? Vendor X now has switches that are for management. They have them for management compute, and they have them all the way up where you can do all three, right? Having that breadth, I think, from the eyes of the consumer as well, really helps kind of stick your name as a valid switch manufacturer. And I think that a lot of the, obviously we can identify a lot of smaller switches, no problem. But I think also some of maybe the larger, more well-known ones, focusing on adding some of those lower cost switches will only strengthen their position, right? So I want to make that point as well.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. When I talk to customers and we're talking data center, perfectly fine. Everyone is fine with paying $8,500 for top of rack switch, because they need the ports, they need to have the bandwidth, they need to have those capabilities for everything which is in the rack, basically. But when we're looking on edge scenarios where we maybe have 4 nodes, who wants to buy such large switches? We maybe need only a 12-port, 24-port switch for the whole building, with redundancy too, yes, which is on a much lower price point. And having those validated would really help most of the customers. And those customers want to stay with their vendors because they maybe have the overall management solutions, like from Cisco, like from there, where you have your whole switch fleet in your one single pane of glass.
Mm-hmm.
And not having those capabilities often either that's what I had in the past, just because of switches, they just said, okay, we cannot run that project because the switch requirements are too high and I cannot pay $10,000 for an edge location. Why can't why can you, dear beloved vendor, not give me the smaller ones? They're enough from a capacity and capability perspective. They're perfectly fine with the feature sets.
Mm-hmm.
as you said, often there's revenue behind, but we had a pre-discussion before where I said sometimes it's good to make lower margins to just bring in your rent
Right.
to cover your costs, and it's another case with you want to bring in your rent every month, and everything is on top to buy the new car.
Yeah, and I think especially for this, there is huge impact from voice of the user, right? Voice of the customer in this one. We're not dictating which switches have to be on the list. We're saying here's what we've identified as sort of the minimum requirements needed. Uh, Please come our way, right? And I think that as a user, you have a lot more power when it comes to what should be listed here because you're the one, you're the ones who are using these devices. You know what's been working. You know what's available. On my end, right? I've been working, for example, like with Supermicro. So I've been working with them over the last 6 months, and they were just listed as a new Switch vendor. Obviously I'm one person reaching out and working, but this is something where I'm saying as a call to action, right, to a lot of our users out there. If you are, working with these switches and you do want to have them listed, you have the power to push the vendors to do
Yeah.
this, right? You can say, hey, the process is straightforward. This will be requirements, and it's pretty easy to get listed, right? So I'm saying it as like a PSA, right? Work alongside me as we continue to build out this list, because I really do want to have every angle covered here. And I know at least the biggest gap right now is those, management only or more low cost switches. That's kind of the gap that we're trying to fill right now.
Yeah. And there are enough out there. And
Exactly.
and is there a process if we as Microsoft see? So we are also getting a lot of feedback on, hi, wouldn't that vendor be a good fit, or couldn't that switch type be a good fit? Is there something like a process in place if you hear a lot of noise about that, to report back to, let's say, Cisco or Dell or Arista? I have a lot of customers asking for that specific system types they want to use. Do you report that back? Is there a process in place to give a bit more influence from a Microsoft side to that, or is it really pure through customers, through engineering of the vendor itself?
Oh, you're saying from like an internal standpoint.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, internal, I mean, that's even easier. Just, ping the team, ping the switch validation team, shoot the alias an email. I mean,
Yeah,
so
but the switch validation team, is there a connection to let's say Cisco saying, hey,
I
we as a
see.
switch validation team heard that we have 100,000 customers using that specific type
Mhm.
of switch, which is not validated. Would it be okay for you to validate it and put it on our
Gotcha.
validation list?
Yes. So, from all the vendors that are listed right now, for example, we have the top contacts who would be responsible for validating and running those tests. So that's from what it currently exists, right? I think the difficulty now is identifying for the vendors that aren't listed who's the best point of contact. But for anybody who's currently listed, if there is a switch, let's say for Cisco, that you find that hasn't been listed but could be a good fit, absolutely, we have people. We know who reach out to for that.
Yeah. And again, huge shout out for the community. If you know someone at the switch vendor, looking again on to my friends with the great Wi-Fi stuff, um, just ping us. Maybe you could, or use the alias from your team. Say, hey, I know that specific guy for that vendor. He's open to talk with you. Just ping him,
Mhm.
or I can put you in contact. So that's community work, which is amazing. So and it could influence a lot of us, basically,
Exactly.
to do more. Is there, as we're talking about protocols, features, is there something from HCI, from Windows Server, which interacts directly with the switch? So is there a feature? I had LDP, for example, with one customer today, which is required for certain communication to see the p-switch configuration, etc. Is there more? Is what influences the communication from the host to the switch?
You're saying from a requirements perspective?
Yeah.
So right now, there isn't anything that's in the pipeline. That being said, there is, and this we talked about this at the server summit and the partner forum. So it is public information, but we are working on a network topology feature that will build upon what we currently use from LLDP to fully flesh out from switch down to VM, right? Your network topology along with any sort of health monitoring, diagnostics, cable mismatch, and all that. So there haven't been any new requirements identified for that. That being said, there could be in the future around the LDP side of things. One discussion that we're having now is around VLANs and what makes sense to be the minimum requirement for VLANs. Now, I say all this, but I also want to point out that if we find, let's say, enough low-cost switches, right, there's enough desire there, that maybe don't meet one or two aspects of compute or storage, does it make sense to make like a sub requirement or like a sub certification for that class, right? Do we break down the requirements further and say you have HCI A and HCI B? Do you see what I mean? So I don't want to say that any of these requirements are going to be locked in for the next 5-10 years, right? But I want to point out that as we build out new features, there is enough lead time given, right? Minimum a year. But I also want to say that we are very much open to adapting this, what's the word I'm looking for, ecosystem and the way we validate based on what we find is needed. And so I want to just say that because I don't want folks to take a look and say, oh, that we're kind of locked into this 3 traffic class certification where only these requirements need to be met. Ultimately, it comes down to what people use. And if we find people are using a certain class of lower cost switch that doesn't meet, let's say, DHCP again. Actually, that was probably an easy one probably everybody will have that one. But let's do one of the compute requirements. Okay. Well, maybe we can then rework it a little bit where we have a sort of enterprise level and we have a non-enterprise level.
I think we have that already in the documentation with the compute with SDN and without.
Correct. You're right.
Where you can say, okay, if you have that certain type of switch which does not support that specific features, then you can't use SDN or you can't run that specific feature of Kubernetes or whatsoever, or SMB stuff you cannot use on a storage network if you do not support that specific requirement of SMB. I think that we started with that on the docs already, but as you said, it's just adapting and getting those feedback in and getting those information from everyone who is working with the product, basically.
I agree. That's the difficulty right now to kind of make those predictions and anticipate what changes we'll need to make because we don't have enough of a sample set of those, ubiquity switches, or we just don't have that information yet to say, okay, maybe we should revisit what we have as requirements. Right now, it's really been based off that enterprise level, and so that's why we have this ask to like build up this list of more affordable switches so that we can actually take a step back and look and say, okay, there is a big enough difference in what is supported. Maybe we should rework this.
Yeah. And it also makes sense as enterprises have completely different requirements than the small, medium business customers, startups. Those enterprises often require much more enriched feature set from their hardware than those smaller business would have, or those retail stores would require. And that's what I saw when we switched to the requirements from 22H2 to 23H2, which was from 21H2 to 22H2, which was a huge blocker for many mid-tier customers because their switches didn't support the features yet. And there was a huge blocker for them to move to the next version because of that. That's what I really, I don't like to see that, to be honest. Enterprise customers dictating feature and requirements, and we're leaving these smaller customers, these smaller data center providers, etc., out of the scope because of those large, huge strategic enterprises.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's again some kind of voice of the many against the one big voice, and it only works if the many talk to a Microsoft, to their vendors,
Right.
to a Dell, to a Lenovo, and push forward.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's why, and you've made the same call to action as well, in that, the more information we can gather about what switches are out there that folks are using that aren't listed, and the more partners that aren't, the enterprise that we can talk to, we'll have a better picture of, what some of those mid-tier to lower tier requirements could look like.
Yeah.
That could differ from what we see the data center wise. Yeah.
Yeah. And with that, I would close the interview for today, reaching out to everyone. Use the comments below to leave those feedback. Use our hybrid fans as a feedback channel. I can talk back to Basel, to anyone in the PG to give those feedbacks, to give those requests. And also use, if you see that later on LinkedIn with the HCI Tech Talk, use those comments. When we'll also forward that. Yeah, Basel, thank you so much for answering all of those questions I heard so far about the switch validation program. Thank you so much for your time. As it was amazing.
Yeah, I know. I thank you for your time as well, Flo. An honor to be, part of the video, and I'm looking forward to, where we continue to grow this ecosystem, and looking forward to working with everybody, both internal and obviously external. So
Yeah. And I would not stop poking Ubiquity.
yeah, yes,
I'm doing that since 2 years now, so I'm pretty used to
they
it.
have a lot of fans, so I'm
The-
all for getting them listed. Yeah, they
Yeah,
have a lot of
and
fans.
same here. It's amazing stuff. I have a huge fleet of Ubiquity switches, Wi-Fi. I'm now adding more security cameras in for the house. I really like them, again, heart and soul projects. I want to get them on the list. So
Well, I'm
everyone out there,
curious.
help us.
Yeah, so yeah, offline, I'm curious if you're able to run the tool on your devices, what kind of
I
results
will,
you
I
get.
will, I
We
will,
can sync up on that. Yeah.
yeah, I will do. I will run it on my larger switches and give feedback. I
Awesome.
know the aggregating switches to 2 IUs will not be capable, but I think the Enterprise XG should work,
Okay.
at least for computer management. That's what I know.
Okay. And we can get it
Cool.
listed for one, two, or all three. So perfect.
Maybe I make a video out of that.
There you go. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Perfect. Thank you, Basel.
Awesome.
And for everyone else, subscribe to the channel, leave us comments, leave us requests for more videos, and yeah, have a great time.